Welcome back to another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Stephen Roy Goodman, your host. Today we'll be talking about the legacy of Chief Albert Luthuli, and I'm here in Groutville, South Africa at the Luthuli Museum, where we're going to be speaking with a number of guests who have quite a lot to say about the chief and his impact on past life in South Africa and contemporary life in South Africa. My first guest is Gcina Mhlophe, who's a world-renowned storyteller. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, delighted that you're here. Maybe if you could tell us a story or two about why are you so involved with this museum?
Thank you very much. My name is Mhlophe. I'm an author and a storyteller. I'm based here in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. And for the longest time, I have been very fascinated by the life of this great leader, Chief Albert Luthuli, and the work that he had done, what he stood for. He was not only an educationist, he was also a religious leader. He was also a community builder, because he was a chief. And people used to come and be addressed by him across the fence, even though he was banned during the time he was the president of the African National Congress. But my biggest connection with this museum is my adoration and respect of his wife, Mama Nokukhanya Luthuli. Her name Nokukhanya means mother of light. She was phenomenal. She was soft-spoken, but her work spoke for itself. It spoke volumes.
And speaking of the actions, what are some of the actions that the museum is doing now to reach out to South African youth and the society in general?
I think the legacy that they left, both Baba Luthuli and Mama Nokukhanya Luthuli, they were connected with the family, with the family that is all around. The community was like their own family. And now schools, teachers, young primary school children, adult high school students, and also young creative writers and what, they come to this museum. It's like this oasis where they can come and drink and be inspired and feel like they've got something to say. And I think even though they're not alive anymore, their spirits are here and making the people who live in this place to feel like we matter, we are connected, our voice can be heard. And for me, that pleases me in a big way.
Well, that's terrific. And when you and I chatted before to get ready for today, we talked about the Mandela-ification of the country. And can you say a word or two about that and what that means exactly?
Very often journalists are very lazy. They hold on to one person and they talk about that person forever and ever. There are so many people who fought for freedom in this country, both men and women. There are so many people who led by example. And when you think of Baba Oliver Tambo, you think of Baba Robert Sobukwe. We're heading towards now the 21st of March, which was Sharpeville Day. And also we think of what Chief Albert Luthuli did when he received the Nobel Prize. And he came back and he wanted every cent of that money to be part and parcel of assisting the people of this land. And in fact, Mama Nokukhanya, because Baba Luthuli got banned immediately afterwards, she was the one who made sure that the money was used in a particular way, in a helpful manner, and to assist those who were going to be going to exile in different countries. Now in South Africa, we are dealing with places where there's so much underdevelopment, and it breaks your heart, because that's not what we fought for. The kind of freedom we fought for is the freedom that says we are nation builders in whatever line of work we are in. Me, I'm working in a heritage space, and working in a heritage space and creative arts and doing art in education, it's extremely important then that we encourage young people to know who they are, to know where they come from, to know that your family name speaks to what you can become. You're not an air plant. And so the legacy of Luthuli is leading us to this place where we are in 2025 to say nobody must be an air plant. Those who came before us must show us the way, even though they are no longer alive. At my organization, Gcina, our saying is touch the past, feel the future. If you don't have a sense of where you come from, how do you know where you are going? If you translate that in isiZulu, that's unbelievable. In my mother tongue, we say, Zazi imvelaphi yakho, uhlomele ikusasa. Now it changes the meaning altogether. It's not just touch the past, feel the future. It says, know where you come from and be armed for your tomorrow. So when we are talking about the legacies of Chief Albert Luthuli, of Sobukwe, Osisulu, Mandela, all of these big names, we say be armed for your tomorrow. So for me, being connected with the arts and education, I'm trying to arm young people for our tomorrow.
When speaking of the arms, one of the key issues, of course, as most people know, is that the armed struggle started during Chief Luthuli's presidency.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So it was a different time when our freedom fighters were talking peace, but it was a foreign language to the apartheid government. So they had to take up arms to try and defend themselves. But now the arms we're talking about is education and skills development and knowledge, because knowledge is power. There's so much that has changed. Artificial intelligence, so many things are done in computers, and we connect with different people in different countries via Zoom and via different ways. The world is big, but it's not so big anymore. We can connect with people in New Zealand, with people in Egypt, we can connect with people in Canada, in wherever. We can go to Chicago, we can go to the Philippines. It doesn't matter. We come together, we say, let's learn, let's work together. Even though we are we are feeling that maybe we're not economically as strong as other countries, but knowledge and having a sense of heritage and a sense of belonging, we can teach the world so much more.
When speaking of teaching the world, how would you like to teach the world in terms of Luthuli's legacy specifically? What specific things about the Luthuli legacy that may be different from other freedom fighters in South Africa?
Luthuli was not only preaching peace in the way of freedom fighting. People refer to Martin Luther King to be one of those counterparts. Baba Luthuli also knew that education is a way of fighting. And I think anybody who thinks our freedom will thrive and have a significant role to play in our land and the future of our children, without education, I don't know what's wrong with them.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Pleasure. Thank you. We're continuing our discussion about the legacy of Chief Albert Luthuli, and I'm here with the director of the museum, of the Luthuli Museum, Brian Xaba. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Steve, for this opportunity. And again, as I've said, welcome to South Africa.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Yes.
Why did you decide to become the director of the museum? This is an interesting job, and obviously you care about Chief Luthuli's legacy, but why did you decide this was so important to you?
Well, firstly, it was an opportunity. I applied for the job. But also because the museum also represents a part of our history that actually is quite important to many of us South Africans. And then I think also Chief Luthuli, in terms of what he stood for, his life, and also what he's supposed to mean for a lot of us currently in today's world. Also then in Bazet Rock, it actually drew me to the museum itself. It's an opportunity also to be part of something bigger than myself. And because here at the Luthuli Museum, we are tasked with the responsibility not only actually to profile this remarkable man, but also to try and impart and then his values, his philosophy, his outlook on life to today's South African youth, children, and everybody else who's interested to know about his life. So that's why I applied for the job, and as far as to become the director of this museum.
And in terms of the outlook, what outlook is so important to you and to the legacy?
You're asking me about Luthuli's outlook. If I may say, the legacy of Chief Luthuli in terms of what he saw South Africa becoming. You know what happened in our country in 1994? That is what Luthuli actually lived for. That's what he aspired for. He looked forward to a South Africa that will embrace everyone, irrespective of race, color, or class. He believed much in a shared society, in a society that's shared with everybody. And he also believed that as human beings, as a society, we need to actually then, as we engage and as we address our issues or conflict, we do that in a manner that actually does not have many of us resorting to violence or to intolerant behavior toward the next person. So for Chief Luthuli, for me being here, it's also basically something that actually I identified closely with in terms of his life and his outlook and what he wanted for many of us here in South Africa.
And you referred to 1994 and the election of Nelson Mandela when he became the first democratically elected president of South Africa.
Yes.
During that time, what did you think about Chief Luthuli's legacy? Because at that time, no doubt you were thinking about the 1994 election, But if you could think back to that time, what were you thinking about in terms of the Luthuli legacy? Were you thinking about the Luthuli legacy?
No, not that much, but I know that during 1994, as you know, that our country was in a state of panic, in a state of potential war, and a lot of us actually then we really wanted that the resolution of the conflict that was actually happening, that it happens in a manner that actually is not going to result in a loss of life. A lot of people's lives were lost building up towards us getting to 1994. But even a lot of people's lives were lost even during that time in 1994. And there was a lot of effort. There were a lot of church groups who were praying for a resolution in South Africa that is not going to involve violence. So it was at that time, a lot of us basically, as we were engaging, and then we then started to get introduced to a history of our leaders that actually then have been advocating, have been pushing for South Africa that actually is going to basically become a peaceful country. And for that South Africa that is not going to always resort to violent methods in as far as basically getting to a way of life that actually embraces everybody else. So I was not thinking of Luthuli at that point in time, but I think for most of us, as I've said, as things were happening in the country, we became aware that actually then the solution has to be non-violent. And I think when Bob Mandela and when the country was just basically building up to this confrontation, I mean, he just basically did what I think Luthuli would have done. He called everybody together and basically directly told people that this is not how we're going to arrive at our solution. So at that point in time, we all started to understand that no, Bob Mandela, oh, that means that basically he also was influenced some way in terms of basically getting to this peaceful resolution in our country.
And speaking of the peaceful resolution, my understanding, some people say that Chief Luthuli was a pacifist, but that's not quite right from what I understand.
Yes.
So how would you describe his position?
No, I know many people, well, some people, as I've read, they thought he was a pacifist because he stood for non-violent resolution of conflict. But I don't think he was, and many of us don't think that he was a pacifist. But then he was a person who basically then believed in militant confrontation in addressing some of these issues that actually then we were confronting in South Africa during apartheid. But he wouldn't go to the point of basically saying that, well, you hit the other cheek and I give the other cheek. He did believe that basically there has to be some sort of a measured response in conflict situations. But it was not much to the extent that you will call him a pacifist. And for him, I want to believe that actually, when the issue of the armed struggle came up and all of that, I mean, for him, he saw that in as far as the resolution of conflict or basically taking a militant approach to such a situation like apartheid. And for him, it was more like a defensive approach to addressing the matter. It was not basically, well, he was not, I sometimes think of a pacifist as a person who just basically then says, oh, well, I might as well wait for, well, I'm saying he was not a pacifist. I don't know how to actually explain it further, but he believed in militant engagement in addressing issues, as much as he also believed in nonviolence. But he was not a person who will, I've said my piece.
Well, fair enough. And one more question, if I may.
Yes.
Is how about university groups who come here? What do university groups and school groups tend to take from the visit to the museum?
Well, the first thing that they actually get awed by, is that this is the home that he lived. And this house is a modest house. Now, Chief Luthuli is a universal figure, international figure. So when they come here, they want to believe that a person who was the first Nobel Peace Laureate in Africa will basically be living in a home, in a house that was basically befitting a person of that stature, or a person who's revered internationally for his stance on nonviolence will be living in an environment that actually basically will be full of all the trappings of success. So they come here, they take away the sense of modesty, and the sense of humility, the sense of humbleness that Chief Luthuli basically manifested in his life. So their take home is the experience of his home, and also learning about his values, his philosophy. And remember, he also adopted his approach during very difficult times. And you know, if you understand the extent and the depth of apartheid, you wouldn't want actually to be wanting to respond towards it in a manner that is actually non-violent. But he did that. So they take home with a sense of knowing that, look, at the end of the day, no matter how difficult things are, you must remain firm and resolute in your principle, in your approach, because everything comes to pass. And Luthuli, by then, when he was adopting his stance, maybe people then thought that maybe it was not going to be successful. But when we came to 1994, some of us, especially myself, I saw 1994 as a manifestation, as a result of his belief and his philosophy, that we can only achieve as a collective, irrespective of what differences, and every difference has a right to exist. But it's just that we need to be tolerant of each other because we are in one earth, as they say.
We're continuing our discussion about Chief Luthuli with none other than Veli Luthuli, who is Chief Luthuli's daughter-in-law. Welcome.
I'm pleased to be here.
Well, I'm pleased to be here as well, and my understanding is that you actually lived in this house.
Yes, I did. I came here in 1967. I was welcomed by the chief himself to this village. After having read about it in a book called Nomanini, written by B.W. Vilakazi, where he had given us a picture of how Groundville looks and how that river especially looked. So I was thrilled to actually see it in person.
And when you saw it in person and you saw not only the house but also the chief in person, was he welcoming to you when you met his son?
Yes, he was very, very welcoming. When I met him, I was 18 years old, fresh from high school. But 2 years later, 2 years after that, I came back to get married to his son. When I met him for the first time, he was very welcoming. He came down to my level because I was a naive little girl at the time and I didn't know much about politics. After having been at Inanda Seminary, a girls' high school where we were very, very sheltered. We didn't know anything about the world. But the chief didn't tell me who he was, you know, in stature, in politics. But only my aunt later on said, "Oh, how come you don't know about the chief?" So she told me. So that gave me an impression that the chief was very humble. He didn't boast about anything.
Well, that's actually one of the things that I think is interesting about putting this spotlight on Chief Luthuli many years later. From what I could tell, he was very humble, and that even though he was a major figure on the world stage, he had ideas about where he wanted to take South Africa, but he didn't necessarily hit you over the head with that. He showed through examples.
Yes. And he gave me a few lessons back then when I was 18, that it was important to do good when you are on earth, to care about other people. He said it's more important than anything else. So I've remembered most of those lessons that he told me while I was a girl, when I first came to Groundville.
And when you went to, I believe you met his son at university, or you went to university together. There was some connection with the university. What was the connection with the university?
After I graduated from the girls' high school, I went into university to do BA Social Science. That's where I met my husband, Edgar Susiso Cyril Luthuli. 2 years after we got to know each other, we got married.
And now, so you lived here. This is a small house, so what did you share?
One bedroom across the passage was the main bedroom belonging to the chief. The one opposite it was the one belonging to my husband and me, where our firstborn child was born before the chief died, 3 months before the chief died. But 3 other children were born in that bedroom as well, small as it is.
And if I can ask you one more question, if I may, what lessons would you like new generations of students and scholars to remember about Chief Luthuli and his legacy?
I would like everyone to remember that Chief Luthuli was a selfless person. He gave up his family life to go and struggle for the liberation of the people. Doing that respectfully, non-violently, I believe that was quite a sacrifice on Chief Luthuli's part.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts today, and welcome back to your home. And,
Thank you.
And thank you for having us in South Africa.
Yeah, it's
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. We're continuing our discussion of the Luthuli Museum in Groundville, South Africa, and I'm here with Puleng Segalo, who is the Luthuli Chair at the University of South Africa and a psychology professor. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, you have written extensively about many things in South Africa, but you also hold the Luthuli Chair. Can you say a word or two about what that means?
The Luthuli Chair is housed at the university, and what that means is that we have the opportunity as an academic institution to do research work, academic work that is drawing from the philosophy and legacy of who Luthuli was, not only to South Africa, but globally, and to see ways in which we can learn from these in the work that we're doing as researchers and scholars.
And how specifically are you doing that?
We are working on various research projects that are focusing on issues such as indigenous knowledge systems, cultural diplomacy, gender justice, issues of land, and also just the importance of social cohesion and nation building. So we do this through supervising students at master and doctoral level, but we're also working on projects where we collaborate not only with the local communities, but we also collaborate with other institutions across the globe. And this also then forms part of the diplomacy work, which was so central to Luthuli in his quest for the importance and creation of a world where we can all live together as a nation and as a people.
Well, and that collaboration, can you say a little bit about the collaborations in the United States in particular? I think you're going to Atlanta pretty soon to do a project.
That is correct. So Morehouse College and the University of South Africa, particularly the Chief Albert Luthuli, is looking at ways in which we can find synergies and collaborate in imagining a better world.
Well, that's interesting. And in terms of, you mentioned a second ago about the land issue. One of the things that's been very confusing to a lot of people in the United States is trying to understand the issue about land in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you could say a word or two about that.
This has got historical implications to it. When we look at the history of colonialism, the history of apartheid, and the issue of land, the Land Act of 1913 in South Africa, and how then land was apportioned among the different groupings within the country, where African people were apportioned land that was not very fertile, very productive. And so following 1994, the quest has been to look at ways in which we can deal with the issue of land redistribution, looking at the ways in which we can provide land for people to live decently, to look at ways in which land can be used productively, but looking at ways in which there can also be land distribution, because land was taken from many communities, many people, without any compensation for the people. And so it's a conversation that is ongoing to say, how do we move forward as a people? Because we understand that land is life, land is productivity, land is very integral to cultural institutions as well, in how people make meaning of their lives. So it's really an ongoing conversation, sometimes very difficult, within a country like South Africa, but it's an important one because, as I said, land is life and land is dignity.
And can you say a word or two about the land that we're on? We're north and east of Durban.
Correct.
And why is this museum and this house here?
The museum is here because this is where Albert Luthuli grew up. This is where Albert Luthuli was the chief of the community around here. And this is the land where he lived as a political leader of the ANC. And this is the land and the house and the yard where he also welcomed many dignitaries, international and locally, and many of the decisions around the running of the ANC happened within this land. So it's got a huge significance. And also, when we're looking at the cultural implications as well, when we go back in history, some people might know about Shaka Zulu, they might have read or seen on television about Shaka Zulu. So the history of the people of this area, also intertwined with the history of the people in the country, makes this space very, very significant, even when we think about the missionary and the missionaries. So Groudville, also named after Groud, Mr. Groud. So there is, I think, that history that is very significant and important, that makes it worthwhile for people to come all the way to come and have a look at the museum because of the history that it holds. And of course, as I said, this is where Luthuli grew up, this is where Luthuli lived his life, and this is where, sadly, also he passed away as well.
And speaking of what happened when he passed away, my understanding is there was tremendous controversy about his death. Do you have a thought or two about that?
Well, that's an ongoing conversation. We know that he passed away in 1967. He was hit by a train, and it's assumed that it was an accident. But there are many stories and controversies, as you say, around that, because this was a route that was not uncommon for him. He loved taking walks. He always walked around that path. And the question was, what was different that day that he could not hear the train coming, he could not see, he could not feel the tremor, that he just was hit by a train, which then ultimately led to his demise. So I think for the family and for us as academics, but generally also for the people of South Africa, it remains an open-ended question. And that's why the inquest then has been reopened, and there's a conversation to say, is there a way that perhaps we can do more investigations, more conversations, more digging to look at whether we can find a satisfactory, if you will, conclusion to this matter, not only for the family, but I think for the people of South Africa, because he represented all of us as a nation.
Well, thank you for your engagement today. This has been terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you very much.